Golden child brother sabotaged my business startup, so I cut off my toxic family. Years later they crawled back wanting to invest, but I just laughed in their faces. I, 33, female, have had no contact with my parents for the past 3 years. The reason for that was my younger brother, 30, male, who convinced our parents, a couple of years ago, that investing in my business was a bad idea and told them to back out at the very last minute and left me without any investors after I had already quit my job. I'm gonna be blunt and just say it, I hate my brother. And this is not just because of what happened a couple of years ago. I have always hated him since I realized that my parents were always going to love him more than me. He was always the golden child, and I was whatever. My parents are immigrants, and in our culture, men are pretty much kings. So we were never treated equally, and they didn't even pretend that we were equals. It had always been made abundantly clear to me that he would always come above me. My parents are extremely traditional, and they think that the only duties of a woman are the ones related to household chores and marriage and babies. That is it. I have always known that they had been expecting a son as the first kid, but they got me instead. I wouldn't say that they were outright cruel to me, but it was very obvious that there was a certain bias when it came to my brother and I, and that bias was always in his favor. It would probably help the situation if my brother wasn't a huge jerk, but unfortunately, he was. He had always known that my parents would love him more than me, no matter what, and he shamelessly used that to his advantage. He would constantly hog the limelight whenever I achieved something and make sure that every day was about him. Just an example of his attention-seeking behavior, on my 18th birthday, he decided to announce that he was dating a college senior and was planning on dropping out of high school to live with her. Now obviously that would send any parent into hysteria, and that's exactly what happened, not to mention the friends and relatives who were present at the party and heard his crazy announcement. None of that ended up being true, but it didn't matter because he had already ruined my birthday. So you guys can probably imagine what kind of person he was. He was a horrible human being, and I despise him to this day. I swear once I moved out for college, I never looked back and didn't come back home unless and until it was absolutely necessary for me. My parents also didn't seem to miss me much. They had their golden child with them, and that's all that mattered. Even when he moved out to start college, he got a bigger goodbye than I did. My farewell party only had my family and a couple of my friends, but for him, they put together a huge bash and invited everybody that they knew, even rented out a proper restaurant to celebrate that occasion. I didn't have any hopes for my parents, and I knew that once I was an adult, I was on my own. There was no way that they would ever want to spend any sort of money on me, and the only reason that they were even paying for me to go to college was because they could, since my dad was pretty rich. I was actually pretty glad that they were financially well off, because to them, sending me to college was a huge waste of money since I was only supposed to get married and have a family once I graduated. But I had begged them to let me go and said that if they did, I would be eternally grateful to them, and I guess having some sort of control over me is what made them pay for me to go to college. That's just my guess though, but I'm sure that it might be pretty accurate. Anyway, I graduated from business school and I was a really great student, so it wasn't hard for me to find a job soon after. Once I started earning, I told my parents that I would pay them back the entire amount eventually, but I wasn't getting any time soon. They were kind of disappointed because they had actually believed I was going to start looking for prospective husbands just after I graduated so I could settle down and have a family. My mother was actually still opposed to the idea of me working and said that it was much safer for me to just start looking for a guy and get married, because if I got older and richer, then no guy would ever want to marry me. Yeah, I know it sounds like a nightmare, and it pretty much was, but that's exactly how my parents are. I don't know why they are that way. I'm guessing they were just raised to be like that, but you can always unlearn stuff. I guess they never bothered to. But I explained to my mother that times were changing and it was more important for me to be independent than to have a family. They were mad at me for a few weeks, but when they realized that it didn't affect me in any capacity, they went back to normal and we were back to having a civil relationship. I had already started paying them back at that point since I had a stable job and decent income. After working for a few years and living frugally, I managed to pay off my entire debt. And after that, I didn't really see a point in trying to have a cordial relationship with my parents anymore because, to me, it was clearer than ever that my brother was their only priority. We would occasionally meet for lunches or maybe run into each other at family gatherings before, but once my debt was paid off, I started saying them less because I would always find it very suffocating to be around them, since they would constantly be pressuring me into looking for husbands and getting married as soon as I could. So I started reducing my visits to their house. Another reason for that was also because whenever we would meet, they would constantly be bragging about my brother. He had also graduated from business school, but he was nowhere as close to me. He was a terrible student from what I knew and had wasted his years partying away, so I don't know what my parents were bragging about. It was just annoying because they never bragged about me, even though I was in a much higher position than him and was earning a lot more. My brother hadn't even been able to find a job on his own, or my dad had to hire him, which was basically just an obligation. He could literally not do any work and he would still get paid, so I don't think there was anything very tough or brag-worthy about it. But anyway, I was used to being treated like that by my parents, so it was not surprising in the slightest. The only reason I had ever even stayed in touch with them was because I owed them money and it felt weird not to be on talking terms. But after that was done, I started focusing more on my own work and they didn't try to get me to meet with them more often either, so we sort of grew apart. But then a couple of years later, a coworker of mine and I started brainstorming and decided to start a business of our own after a lot of deliberation. He and I worked out everything before I even approached my parents. We had a proper business plan and everything because I wasn't going to go up to my parents as their daughter but as a potential businesswoman asking for an investment. At the time, my parents and I were barely speaking. It had been really awkward for me to go up to them to ask for money, but I knew that my dad was at least a brilliant businessman and his acumen would really help us. My partner also thought that was a great idea and most importantly, they were our safest bet. So I approached my parents to ask them for an investment and they were actually pretty impressed with whatever that my partner and I had come up with. They didn't find it awkward at all that I had come to them for business purposes after years of being distant from them, and they knew and respected the fact that this was purely transactional. I don't think they would have even agreed to invest in my business if it hadn't been a brilliant idea. I think it's pretty obvious that they didn't care that I was their daughter, but my dad did like the sound of making more money, which is why he agreed. But unfortunately, it had been a verbal agreement and he said that he would only get the legal paperwork done and stuff after he had his lawyers do the due diligence, and we had come up with something more tangible than just business plans. So for months, my partner and I continued to work at our jobs while also working on our business alongside it because we had a couple of potential investors buy. My parents were willing to make the biggest investment and contribute the most. So to impress them and keep them on board, we had to work really hard. It took us a couple of months, but after almost 75% of the work was done, I approached my father again, and he said that he was impressed and that he would finally agree to the paperwork. My partner and I put in our 2 weeks notice literally one day after my dad said that he would be investing and writing us a check soon. But that never materialized because just a couple of days later, my parents called me back to their house and said that they had reconsidered everything and they were not willing to invest in my business anymore. I still remember the conversation and I remember feeling like the world had come to an end because I couldn't believe that they were hanging me out to dry like that. When I asked them why exactly, they didn't think it was a good idea anymore because up until a week ago, they had been quite on board with it. I knew that there was something fishy going on and I had to get to the bottom of it. So I pushed them until they finally told me that they had spoken to my brother and he was the one who had told him that he didn't think that my business was investable and he thought that it was going to fail. So my father was backing out, solely based on his word. I was shocked, so I asked them why hadn't my brother said anything about this before, and my dad told me that apparently my brother had been thinking about it for quite some time, but he wanted to see what exactly I would come up with before he came to a decision. I instantly realized that my brother hadn't been thinking about this. He had only been thinking about how devastating it would be for me if he decided to sabotage me at the very last minute, and that's exactly what he had done. Like a nasty little conniving snake, he had waited until I had done most of the work to tell my dad that he thought that this was a bad idea and was going to fail. So my dad would back out and I would be completely screwed. He had played his cards just right and made sure that I was left in an incredibly difficult position. I threw a fit at my parents' house that day and told them to go jump off a cliff. I said a lot of other horrible things about them and my brother and then went back home to regroup and think about what I was going to do next because I had my partner counting on me as well and I couldn't let him down. I told him what had happened and I was quite devastated, so he consoled me and said that we could still take back our resignations if the company would still have us back, but I had already made the leap and I wasn't willing to go back, so I started looking for other investors. We really needed the funding because we had some big ideas and our own savings wouldn't be enough, so we were really selling our business idea hard and pitching to anyone who would hear us out. After a couple of weeks, we had managed to put together a couple of investors and they did give us the funding that we desperately needed. So we started biting our business from the ground up. The first couple of months were the most difficult. There was a lot of work to do, and we had a lot of sleepless nights, wondering if we were doing the right thing and if this would work or not. But a few months later, we did manage to break even and we have been going really strong ever since then. There has been no looking back, and it's all thanks to me and my partner and the amount of hard work that we put into this. It was quite simple because we had faith in our idea and ourselves and we knew that we could do this. So my brother, in spite of his very cunning plan, couldn't do this for me because it was in my destiny to be successful and there was no way he was going to stop me. The only good thing that came out of it was that I no longer had to pretend to be on good terms with my family and entertain their BS. I already knew their true colors, but I had still been willing to give them a chance and let them invest in my business because I thought that my parents would be my safest bet, but I forgot just how evil they were and how conniving my brother was. They did not deserve to be a part of this, and I'm glad that they didn't invest because I would hate for them to be a part of my success story. They never even apologized for letting me down at the very last minute, and we never spoke after I stormed out of their house that day. I'm low-key glad that they didn't reach out to me after that because I don't even know what I would say to them. However, recently they got back in touch with me because they wanted to invest in my business. Of course, now that we are doing well, everybody wants to be a part of this. It happened a few days ago. It was a Sunday, so I was at home and they showed up at my place. I've been living in the same apartment ever since I graduated from college, so it was pretty easy for them to find me. When I saw them standing outside my door, I was quite taken aback because I couldn't imagine them having anything to say to me after so long. I mean, it had been almost 3 years since the incident and they had never even tried to get back to me after that. I still opened the door and let them in because I thought that they were going to apologize to me and try to make amends with me. Some crazy part of me thought that they were here to actually make things right with me, but I was wrong. They were only here to say that they finally knew that I was doing well and they now thought that my business was something that they could be a part of and wanted to come on board as investors. They didn't even try to make small talk with me or ask me what I was doing. They just got to the point. I kind of appreciated that because at least they didn't waste my time and make me think that they were going to make things right. But it was just so funny to me how optimistic they were about this because, from the looks of it, I had deduced that they really expected me to just agree with them and let them come on board. I just laughed in their faces and told them that that wasn't happening so they could leave now because we had nothing more to discuss. My father looked really shocked when I told him that, and he started to struggle to find words to explain what he was feeling. He went completely red in the face and said that I had no right to insult him like this because apparently he was my father, and I had to treat him with respect, even though they had never treated me with anything remotely similar all my life. So I told them that I was showing them the exact same amount of respect that they had shown me all those years ago, especially since he was here as an investor and a businessman, not as my father. My parents were pretty scandalized and I could tell that they wanted to argue with me, but I wasn't in the mood to entertain it, so I told them to leave and said that I didn't want any investment from them and we were good. My mother started crying and said that she had always known that letting me go to college would backfire one day, but she just hadn't expected it to happen so soon. I had absolutely no idea what she was talking about, but I just wanted them to go away, so I told them to leave once more. But they refused to move, and instead, my mother continued to cry on my couch, while whining about how I had embarrassed them. She told my father that if he had just not paid for me to go to college, then I wouldn't have gotten a big head and I would have done whatever they had asked me to. Apparently, she believed that letting me go to college had been a mistake and allowing me to work had been an even bigger mistake because apparently, that's what had made me so arrogant and proud now. She thought that had I not done any of it and just started looking for a husband, then I would have had a family by now, but instead of that I'm still single in my 30s and will probably never have a husband or kids. She blamed my father for all of this and said that he never should have entertained the idea of investing in my business, just to get me to listen to them. So at that point, I realized that they were back here only because they wanted to obey their orders once again. They did not care about me or my business, they only cared about appearances, and it was obviously really bad for their reputation that I was still unmarried and didn't have any kids of my own. They were arguing in the living room right in front of me like I wasn't even there, and after a while, I had enough, so I told him to get up and get out, or I would call the cops. My mother started crying, even more hysterically at that point, screaming about how it was just so wrong for me to even imagine, threatening my own parents by saying that I would call the cops. I was getting really impatient and I couldn't deal with this anymore, so I got up and physically removed my parents from my apartment. I work out and I'm pretty tall. It also helps that my parents didn't see that coming and were caught completely unaware. So it was really easy for me to push them out of my apartment and slam the door shut. They left after that and I thought that it was over, but I received a call from my brother a couple of hours later and he was furious. He was actually threatening to sue because he claimed that I had physically harmed my parents and that I owed them an apology because this was no way to behave with the people who had raised me and made me capable of getting to this position in the first place. I thought it was ridiculous because I had been quite gentle with them and I don't think they got hurt. I also don't think that it's illegal for anyone to push people out of their own apartments. But the family is all up in arms against me right now and they say that they are going to sue me if I don't apologize. I cannot figure out what they're so mad about, but they are, and it's really tiring to deal with all the hate. I don't understand what to do right now. Ida for physically pushing my parents out of my house? Update 1. Okay, hey guys, it's been a week since my parents visited me and I kicked them out of my house and my brother went all moral police on me. My relatives have started a full-blown hate campaign against me online and it's been a difficult week for me. At first, I had just been considering apologizing to them for the sake of it so I wouldn't have to deal with all the hate and they would finally stop targeting me. But then I spoke to my partner and I also read the comments here, and I realized that this was never going to stop. Even if I did apologize, they would just find something else to hate me for, and there was another good point about how apologizing would actually make it easier for them to file a lawsuit because that could be treated as an admission of guilt. So apologizing is off the table for now, and I think the only thing that I can do right now is to block them all and hope that it all dies down soon. Because I really can't take the stress. I would also like to address certain things in this update. Since many people had asked me why I had continued to keep in touch with them for so long even after they had treated me badly my entire childhood. To be honest, I don't really have an answer for that. I guess it was just nice to have a family because, like I said in my original post, they were not really outright cruel to me all the time. We did have a few good moments, and that's what I stayed for, I guess. Mind you, I'm just talking about my parents, right now. My brother and I never had a relationship and I'm glad that I got rid of him. He is literally the devil in human form. But I think you guys already might have figured that one out on your own. The way he screwed me over before I even started my own business by getting our parents to back out when all the work was already done, was pure evil genius. I have to applaud him for it because I don't think anybody else would have been able to come up with such a devastatingly cruel plan and try to ruin someone else's life just because they can. Update 2. So, I decided to speak to my partner about what I wanted to do next regarding my parents and stuff. I was honestly just afraid that the posts that my relatives were making would somehow reach my business associates and that would be really bad for us. I was scared that is what somehow negatively impacts our image, but he told me that I should just ignore it and pretend that it never happened and that it would get all my relatives to stop hating me eventually. Surely they have lives of their own as well, and when they realize that this is not bothering me, they will go back to whatever they were doing instead of constantly trying to get on my nerves. And I think he has a point, so that's what I'm going to do. A lot of you wanted me to make a post of my own or try to respond to them in whatever way, and while I appreciate the help, I don't think I need it right now because that will just lead to more drama. I just want to focus on my work and move on with my life, and it won't be possible if I'm constantly getting in trouble. Even though getting in trouble with them doesn't really mean much to me, it's still distracting and I don't need that right now. In other news, since my brother contacted me from a different number because I had blocked him 3 years ago, I decided to find out what he had been up to since then. I had told all my friends that I didn't want to hear about him anymore when I cut my family off, but now I'm kind of interested. So the last time that I heard of him from my friends was just after the fight that I had with my parents, and I told them not to tell me about my family. Back then my brother was still working under my parents and my dad's company. I recently asked a couple of my friends if they knew what he had been up to, and they told me that he was still working there, which is just crazy because in all these years he hasn't been able to move out of the same position, and that's kind of pathetic. They also told me that my dad's company was about to be acquired, and that could be one of the reasons why he had approached me, because he just wanted to be a part of something without feeling completely useless. Also, of course, what my mother said about wanting to keep me under control, and that would be relatively easy if they had a stake in my business, or worse, a majority stake. But whatever, that's none of my business. I just wanted to know because I was kind of curious. They can do whatever they want. Update 3. It's been close to a month since I posted here first, and I did post a couple of updates in the next few days, but after that, I got really busy and there wasn't much that I had to say since my relatives stopped with their hate campaign against me when they realized that I wasn't going to respond to it. My parents and my brother didn't try to reach out to me after that, since I guess it was very obvious that I wasn't going to apologize. I didn't even have anything to apologize for. I just did whatever anybody in the right mind would have done. So yeah, that's it with my family. My dad's company got acquired, by the way. I heard about it a couple of days ago from a friend of mine, and they made a pretty big deal out of it. They posted about it and even threw a party to celebrate that because it was apparently a big move. But I don't know if they realize that this does mean that there is a very real chance that my brother might end up losing his job in the long run. I can't imagine him being competent, and the only reason he even has the job that he is now is because my dad was in charge. But once that changes, it's anybody's guess. It'll be quite interesting when or maybe if he gets laid off, and I would love to be there to find out how they feel about it. I know it's wrong to rejoice in somebody else's failures, but boy, what I would not give to watch my brother fail. Until then, however, he can just watch me succeed, and I'm hoping that they do keep track of me because I'm only going to get bigger and richer. So they had better watch out. But on a lighter note, a lot of you guys had been asking me if my partner and I had a thing. It's really cute that people want to find love in everything, but he and I are just good friends. However, I do have a boyfriend and we have been together for the past couple of years. I didn't mention it because I didn't think it was relevant, and also because I've been really caught up with the whole fiasco that my parents were responsible for, and it just kind of slipped my mind. But yes, we have been together for a while and things are going great. My parents don't know about it obviously, but we're even thinking about getting married in a year or so. And guess who won't be invited to that wedding? Lol. My parents had the chance to be decent human beings for once, but they screwed it up, as they do with most things.